Breaking news, folks. A freight train has derailed in the American state of Montana.
A nightmare for a trainload of Amtrak passengers stuck inside for nearly 30 hours.
Some even calling it the train from hell.
I genuinely think it was a nightmare.
It's no secret that the American railway system is in need of a makeover. And recent environmental disasters with freight shipments and deadly accidents haven't exactly helped its reputation. But things were very different just a century ago. The United States had by far the largest and best passenger rail network in the world. It was a prime driver of economic growth resulting from a successful, even if sometimes corrupt, public-private partnership that massively expanded rail miles. But over time, that dominance started to fade, resulting in a rail system today which has atrophied to become a shadow of its former self. And this decline matters. The Japanese and Europeans have built world-class high-speed rail networks in the late 20th century, which helped make their companies more efficient and fostered tourism. So what happened? Could modern rail systems like we enjoy here in Germany actually work in the United States? Or are there physical and political barriers that will always ultimately derail any future railroad expansion? Well, let's take a look. The story of modern America and its position as an economic and geopolitical power honestly cannot be written without the railroad. Built for both freight and passenger trains, it expanded rapidly in the half-century that followed the Civil War. It increased from 35,000 miles to more than 250,000 by the start of World War I. And these railroads furthered development of industrial capacity, particularly by driving demand for the two most important resources of the Second Industrial Revolution: coal and steel. They also played an indispensable role in fostering Western migration. However, all of this expansion came at a cost. Railroad companies chased profits and put their own interests ahead of public good. With no government regulation to limit them and a near monopoly on long-distance travel, railroads in the late 19th century were free to set exorbitant rates. So the ensuing backlash compelled national leaders to take regulatory action. The problem was that they really didn't know how to proceed effectively. In 1887, Congress created the Interstate Commerce Commission, or the ICC, to challenge the railroad monopoly. But for decades, the agency was basically powerless. But that all changed under the New Deal as Democrats augmented the ICC's power. They hoped to reverse the inequalities they believe resulted from high ticket prices. But they ended up unilaterally weakening the railroads and undermining a key pillar of America's economic system. What the New Dealers didn't seem to realize was that times had changed dramatically. First, the massive undertaking of creating a coast-to-coast system had been mostly completed. There weren't really a whole lot of new territories to conquer. Second, the need for speedier, more comfortable service was altering railroad operations. And this was particularly true as tourism was becoming a critical profit center. But third, the railroads were also incorporating new technology such as all-steel cars and more powerful locomotives. So these innovations presented massive new capital obligations that dramatically reduced the railroad's profit margins. So just as all of these financial things were really shaping the modern railroad system, the ICC put in regulations that effectively crippled them. The ICC, again, treated railroads as though they were a monopoly. But while that had been true decades earlier, railroads now faced increasing competition from new actors. Most importantly, automobiles, trucks, buses, and airliners, but also electric streetcars, subways, and commuter trains. So despite a temporary resurgence during the Second World War, by the mid-20th century, the railroads had entered into pretty much a downward spiral. So this, combined with rising labor costs, it resulted in the United States two largest rail companies, the Pullman Company and Penn Central, to declare bankruptcy in 1970. The largest bankruptcy in American history up to that point in time. So in 1971, the Nixon administration intervened and created what we know today as Amtrak. Amtrak receives considerable subsidies from both state and federal governments, but it's managed as a for-profit company. And this really isn't unusual. No country in the world operates a passenger rail system without public support. That being said, Amtrak's for-profit status is kind of ironic. The train company has never been profitable. Since its founding nearly 50 years ago, it's only thanks to subsidies, which over the years have amounted to around $45 billion that Amtrak has survived to today. But while the American railroads were dying, things were very different here in Europe. Many of you might be surprised to learn that Germany has the biggest rail network in the European Union by a long shot. According to the CIA World Factbook, the Bundesrepublik has 43,468 kilometers of rail track, way ahead of the nearest rival, which is France, who has around 29,600 kilometers of track. In fact, Germany has the 6th longest rail network in the world, more than continent country Australia, and only less than the US, China, Russia, Canada, and India, all countries with much larger land masses. But you know, the early history of rail in Germany was kind of interesting because on the one hand, it was really notable, but also pretty disorganized. On the one hand, Germany is home to the first ever cross-border train line, built between Cologne and the Belgian town of Antwerp. Germany is also the country that invented the electric train, as completed by inventor Werner von Siemens in 1879. But for a very long time, Germany's railway integration was slow because the system was still a hodgepodge of private and state companies beholden to the former kingdom, states, and principalities that existed pre-unification. And even after unification in 1871, the railways were still owned at the state level, despite Otto von Bismarck's best attempts to nationalize the rail system. It was actually only after the First World War that the first national rail company was founded. The Deutsche Reichsbahngesellschaft came into existence in 1922, but a large part of the profit it made went to paying off reparations imposed on Germany after the defeat of the First World War. Plus, the division of Germany after World War II left the two successor states with a network that was severely damaged in the war and largely had to be rebuilt and re-equipped. In addition, much of the former east-west orientation was effectively interrupted. And especially in the West, the lines had to be realigned north-south. Deutsche Bahn's ICE trains have been running since 1991 and were originally built to really sort of connect the big cities within Germany. And today, newer ICE trains still whisk passengers along in quiet, comfortable, air-conditioned comfort. Like jetliners, ICE cars are pressurized, sparing passengers any ear discomfort in the tunnels required to keep the roadbed straight and level for high speed. ICE trains usually have a dining car or bistro snack facilities, but even if you're feeling fancy, you can always book a ticket in first class, which isn't actually all that much more expensive when you think about it in relative terms to like what first class on a plane would be like. German trains are head and shoulders above Amtrak in terms of amenities and overall quality. The bathrooms are nicer, cleaner, and don't remind you of prison toilets. And you know, it might be spotty, but there is Wi-Fi, which is something we didn't have on our overnight train from Chicago to Dallas. Plus, you know, all of the grief that we tend to give Deutsche Bahn for those of us living here in Germany, that they're never on time. To be fair, they're actually pretty remarkably on time by international standards. In Germany, a train is deemed late if it arrives with anything more than a 6-minute delay. But in the US, Amtrak trains are considered on time if arrival at the endpoint is within the minutes of a scheduled arrival time, as you see on this chart. It's based on trip length and total distance traveled by the train from its original destination. So to put this into perspective, an Amtrak trip from Chicago to St. Louis is about 260 miles or just over 400 kilometers. So long as it arrives within 15 minutes, you're good, it's on time. But if that happened from a trip to Hamburg to Dresden, which is around the same distance, it would be considered unacceptably late. In the United States, California is really the only place where high-speed rail plans are actually moving forward, albeit not that quickly or smoothly. The state is currently building a 520-mile high-speed line from San Francisco to Los Angeles, which will eventually extend north to Sacramento and south to San Diego. Well, hopefully. But despite a lot of skepticism and the ever-increasing cost of this high-speed rail system, international models like the one here in Germany have actually given the United States a pretty good blueprint for how to make high-speed rail possible. In fact, the German Marshall Fund actually put out a report in June of 2015 on the lessons that California could draw from the well-developed high-speed rail system in both Germany and France. Specifically, they advised the United States to avoid putting any stops in sparsely populated areas, concentrated on the big cities and keep them centrally located. The problem is that is easier said than done. And some of the reasons are more obvious than the others. The most apparent issue with implementing a high-speed rail network is the size and sparseness of the American landscape. When you fly across the US, look down on a sunny day, you're gonna quickly realize how empty and different it is compared to when you fly across most European countries. And even our denser cities are more suburban sprawl than the concentrated type of urban development you see here in Europe. For instance, Dallas, which is the fourth largest metropolitan area in the United States, has a population density that is less than half of the fourth largest city in Germany, which is Köln. But the next issue is that most Americans live in suburbs, which are dominated by single-family homes sitting on single tracts of land extending for miles. Again, aptly named suburban sprawl. And like we've discussed in a few videos now, this is incredibly different from the way that towns are planned and implemented here in Europe, because in the US, it is very much a car-centric culture, and we design our cities around the automobile. But things here in Europe have, well, been around for a lot longer, but even new developments are purposefully planned for them to be walkable. One consequence of this is the greater use of mixed development strategies, where commercial and residential interests are located in close proximity to one another. So for most of America, it makes what should be a relatively easy decision actually pretty difficult, which is, where in the heck do you even put a train station? Furthermore, in the US, if you had arrived at your destination via train, you're still going to need a car, because most cities don't have convenient metro systems in place that can comfortably shuttle people around to the places they need to go. But one of the most expensive parts of building new rail lines these days is securing land along a relatively straight path. You can't run trains at high speeds along too sharp of a curve. The US has very, very strong property right laws, and it makes securing land exceedingly expensive. Back when it was cheap to secure land, the US had no problem building train tracks across the country. And before the civil rights movement, many urban American city planners would just mow down predominantly Black and minority areas if they wanted new public facilities and infrastructure. So on the one hand, it's actually a very good thing that this no longer happens. But it also means that NIMBYism, or not in my backyard resistance to train travel, is really, really strong, because again, in the United States, your home is likely your biggest financial asset, not your bank account. So a train track going right past your backyard is going to hurt your property value and have pretty severe financial consequences, not even talking about the quality of life differences you might have with the noise that could come from this train. But the next barrier to high-speed train travel might seem obvious, but the automobile really is just deeply ingrained into the core fabric of American culture. And even though this might be changing over time due to concerns about things like carbon footprint and the environment, our transportation future in the US will still likely revolve around cars. I mean, come on, one of the most celebrated entrepreneurs at the moment is a guy that runs a car company. And unlike the US, most other countries are far more willing to place heavy taxes on vehicles in an effort to curb demand. It's one of the reasons why gasoline is so expensive here in Germany compared to the United States. But another important factor of high-speed rail is the value of network effects. It's far more attractive to build a high-speed rail system that looks like a web instead of a point-to-point line. And this is because webs tend to result in much higher utilization than point-to-point systems. And utilization is the most important determinant behind the economics for high fixed cost businesses like high-speed rail. For example, take a look at this high-speed rail map of Europe compared to that of the United States. Yeah, much less web-like for sure. But ultimately, the major limiting factor that we see in the United States is that it just doesn't make economic sense for us to build a web-like structure even remotely close to what we see going on here in Europe. But the last barrier is one that I would wager many outsiders don't necessarily notice about the US railway system. And that's that unlike here in Europe, commercial freight often gets priority, not passenger trains. You know, we actually ran into this past winter when we were traveling again from Chicago down to Dallas. I can't even count the number of times we had to stop on our train to let cargo trains go by. And we would wait, 10, 15, 20 minutes at a time waiting for this to happen. And it's something I actually find quite interesting because technically speaking, for over 50 years, freight railroads have actually been required by law to provide Amtrak with preference to run passenger trains ahead of freight trains. However, many freight railroads ignore the law because it's extremely difficult for Amtrak to hold them to it. So as a result, freight trains caused more than 1 million minutes of delay to Amtrak passengers in 2019. That's equivalent to 2 years of waiting while railroads dispatched freight trains first. Okay, I didn't make this video to be YouTube's biggest party pooper, right? I didn't want to just spend this video talking about the barriers to why I don't think high-speed rail is going to happen, because I do actually think that there are some opportunities that the US could actually leverage to make efficient, economically viable public transportation possible. And one of the big issues that I highlighted in the previous section was just how suburban sprawl limits the attractiveness of high-speed rail. And one of the main reasons is that today, the only real way to get people in the suburbs to train stations is by driving. And realistically, the American love affair with cars and sprawling suburbs isn't something that I think will change dramatically in my lifetime. But when you have such a car-centric culture, you're going to need these massive, just sprawling lakes of asphalt parking lots in order to be able to accommodate people who are willing to take high-speed rail trains to get to their destination. Because again, even if you happen to build a high-speed train network, you still have the fundamental issue, which is that you're probably going to need a car to get around after you pull into the train station, unless you happen to be somewhere like New York City. And this is one of the areas where I can see the growing popularity of car sharing and carpooling apps like Lyft and Uber really helping, and actually might have the potential to make a significant difference by reducing the need for large parking lots. Here in Germany, if you purchase an ICE ticket, unless you go for like the super saver fare, your ticket actually includes a city ticket, which is specifically designed to help get you from the train station to your final destination in the more residential districts, whether that's by streetcar or by bus. Again, yeah, it's actually a pretty nice and attractive feature to these tickets. And I would love to see a program where local residents could get a discount on car sharing or carpooling services to commute to and from the train station so that we're not having cars taking up a parking space. Or maybe we make some kind of reward system that gives you a discount on your train ticket if you arrive to the train station with public transit or by bicycle. Or maybe take it one step further. For travelers in the Northeast Corridor who regularly travel by train for work and have to take their own car, why couldn't we see a partnership between Amtrak and a local green energy provider to create smaller, dedicated priority parking area with spots only for electric vehicles? But the other major improvement that I personally am looking quite forward to is just to make train travel more attractive, more sexy. And I know it sounds vain and very superficial, but Amtrak, it's been in need of a facelift for quite some time. As we documented on our last Amtrak trip, an update to their fleet is long overdue, but coming. And funny enough, they're actually leveraging some pretty famous German engineering and design to make it happen. Travelers using Amtrak routes serving the Mid-Hudson Valley will now see German-designed trains, although you're gonna have to wait until about 2026 to board this sleek modern equipment. The single-deck trains branded Amtrak Aereo are to replace the tubular-shaped stainless steel fleet cars that date all the way back to the 1970s and 80s. According to Amtrak, they'll be used on routes up and down the East Coast, offering modern, spacious interiors with panoramic windows, ergonomic seating offering enhanced comfort with lots of legroom, bigger, sturdier tray tables, movable headrests, a dedicated cup holder, and setback tablet holder. And the new trains are currently being manufactured in California by a division of the German industrial conglomerate of Siemens. And again, while this is, partially a cosmetic upgrade, I do think that these kind of luxuries could go a long way in making rail travel actually competitive against, airlines and cruises where we've become more accustomed to this level of luxury being the expectation. All right, guys, I actually think that is a great place to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed today's content talking about, rail travel. It's something that our family has enjoyed a lot, whether we're in the States or here in Europe. I know our son Jack, he's obsessed with trains, and so we're really looking forward to taking more of that style of travel in the future. And I would love to hear down in the comment section from you guys on what your thoughts are about train travel. If you're here in Europe, how often do you use it? Is it mostly for commuting, or do you actually really consider it when you're going on vacation as a pretty viable way to get you to your final destination? But if you're in the United States and happen to be watching this video, what do you think is the most significant barrier for you to choosing to take a train? If you already commute by train, that's awesome. But what do you see are like some things that you would think could be improved? And what would you actually do differently if you wanted to actually take it for a vacation? What do you think would make that an attractive option over taking a plane or driving your car? Again, let me know down in the comment section below. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from the Black Forest family, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you next Sunday. Cheers!